Um, Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here, and I would once more use the opportunity to thank the organizers of this very important event. I think it's absolutely necessary, especially at the stage of development where we are and at the stage of very, very important things going in the region. I think everybody agrees that very turbulent era is coming. I think that not only region-wise, but for every single emerging market, I think the era when investors were bullish about the emerging market is over. Now the political situation everywhere almost, and especially in this region, dominates the agenda of investors. And in this sense, of course, economic security and what's happening with economic growth becomes very important. The biggest challenge, as I see, is especially for the poor country like Georgia, is that we cannot afford to have low economic growth, unlike more developed states. Not having fast economic development basically leads to the big problem where public and the population starts to question very fundamentals of market economy. And people start to question very fundamentals of values that we are facing. What should be done? Usually, the discussion in the Western world is about different fiscal stimulus policies, monetary policies, what can be done, but we often forget that it's all about fundamentals. And this fundamental in one word is to keep the economy competitive and to keep the country competitive. If we don't maintain our country competitive, it means that we don't get investors, we don't get inflows, and basically all the consequences coming with that. I very often bring the example that if we have the same tax burden as, for instance, Eastern European countries, let's take Romania, for example, if we have the same level of bureaucracy, if we have the same level of regulations, then why somebody would come and invest in Georgia and not in Eastern Europe or in Romania, where the political situation is much stable, market is much bigger, there is no sense going to the frontier markets. So the main question is, at the end of the day, is how we maintain competitiveness. And especially the next 5 years in this country, where we have signed the DCFTA agreement with EU, which should be followed by free trade agreement, which is a very, very important event. But at the same time, we have the big challenge that in the next 5 years, we don't copy-paste the regulations. We need to harmonize with EU regulations, but at the same time, if we just copy-paste, then we just lose attractiveness. And we need to be very careful in this implementation of these projects, and especially publicly doing unpopular things and blaming the EU for that is even more dangerous, because we have seen it a decade ago or 2 decades ago, even in Europe, when everything was blamed to Brussels, and that had very bad results. But all this is 10 times exaggerated when we talk about the poor country. So how should we maintain that? That, I think, is a million-dollar question. I think that we should go into more discussion.
We're waiting for the answer, though. Well, okay, we'll ask you the question.
Okay. Well, I can talk about that for 2 days. So
well, don't worry, we'll definitely make that the first question. So our second speaker is Mr. Aleksishvili from PMCG, Chairman of the Board.
Thank you very much. Chairman, good morning everybody. That's a really very great pleasure to be with you today. So I will also continue the same rhetorics that Georgi started. This is about competitiveness, but at the same time I would pay your attention on so-called midterm challenges that we will have in the nearest future, in 2015 in this particular case, and then in the upcoming years in 2016 and 17. Because I think that this 2015 is really very challenging one due to all these circumstances that Georgi already mentioned, but I guess we have some serious issues in our economy as well. Specifically, I would pay your attention on fiscal side, which is a very important one, as well as regulatory framework and policy coordination issue. First of all, about the fiscal, we know that we have a serious slowdown of the economy, which means we don't have a crisis so far, that's for sure. We have some problems in the economy, especially with the exchange rate, but that's not the problem. But the problem is that the slowdown of the economy will cause some reduction in the tax revenues as well. So looking at the situation is that in nominal terms we have a GDP growth rate by 9% so far. I mean, which is planned in our budget. Which is 4% of inflation and 5% of real GDP growth. Overall, this is 9% of nominal terms. But we and even government several times stated that this year that will not be achievable. So that will be around 2%. Even in this case, if it is 2% and inflation, which last year was around 2%. This year will be 4%. In nominal terms, we will have 6%. So we will have serious lack of revenues in the budget. That means, which means that we have to adjust our fiscal parameters to that. That's really very important. And I think that government should not be afraid of it. I understand that this is really very tough political decision, and I'm sure that it will cause a huge political debates and so on, but that's so important for our macroeconomic stability that I guess government has to make steps towards that as soon as possible, at least start discussion about that, because by the simple arithmetics that will be around 250-300 million lari. Plus, if we add to this the current deficit that also they declared and stated that it has to be reduced, that means, like, you know, the reduction of revenues or the total budget should be higher than 300 million lari. So that's one issue that needs to be addressed, I guess, and probably we will discuss that today as well, because in this particular case there is the importance is how we reduce it, and what are the expenditure side that has to be reduced, because in this case that's also a very important issue. Another one is, as Georgi correctly stated, is over-regulation, which we see it in our daily life, and this is justified by DCFTA sometimes and by EU accession process, which is not correct, because last particular case was really very obvious that that was not the case. For example, Ministry of I don't remember, Ministry of Justice or Ministry of Health prepared the draft law on labor migration, and you remember all that there was a huge kind of regulations there about that. And when this particular issue was discussed with the Prime Minister, and they called Prime Minister or someone in the Prime Minister's office, called for EU consultants, asking whether this is the EU regulation and whether we need to put it in our legislation, EU consultants said that this is government's or country's sovereign right, so we can choose whatever we want. the main issue is to put this regulation under the general framework. So, and they eliminated this particular requirement from the law, which shows that, you know, usually bureaucracy has some kind of fantasy to overregulate something, and this is also kind of natural. The most important one is how to prevent that, how to stop it, and how to avoid this justification with this DCFTA or EU association agreement or approximation process. Then the third one that I will also pay your attention is this policy coordination issue, because this is what we see is a serious problem as well. On one hand, and yesterday I attended the meeting about our foreign affairs EU-NATO integration session, and one of the leaders of our foreign policy, Gachechiladze, mentioned how Iranian governments pleased the CFTA and congratulated the government of Georgia signing the CFTA, because they see Georgia as a gateway for them, for their economy to European market. On the other hand, Ministry of Justice made absolutely unacceptable statements regarding Iranian tourists. That's like absolutely ridiculous from that perspective. So I think that this is also very, very important and obvious that we need to have some much bigger economic policy coordination to avoid those challenges that we have in short term, in 2015, in mid-term, which I mentioned in next, 16, 17, because upcoming elections, this is also kind of somehow deteriorates the situation in terms of investment, and the long term, because as Georgi correctly mentioned, without competitiveness, we have no perspective to invest, to attract foreign direct investments, which are the most important contribution to our economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our third speaker is Archil Gachechiladze, who's the Deputy CEO for Investment Management of the Bank of Georgia.
Thank you. I know it's a difficult name, but your pronunciation was fantastic.
I actually practiced for about 20 minutes.
My professor would call everybody by their last name, Mr. this, Mr. that, and I would look at my name and say, Archil. Good morning. Thank you for being here. It's a real honor to sit on this panel with a distinguished guest, and I would like to mention a couple words about the group that I represent, just for your information, and then I'll go to the subject matter. So Bank of Georgia is the largest bank and largest operator of different businesses. It's really a group now of, and it's fully publicly owned. It's listed on London Stock Exchange, and we are fully institutionally owned. The largest shareholders are the Schroders, Fidelities, and the likes. So if you are invested in FTSE index, we are part of FTSE 250 index. There's a chance that some of your pension money is with us. And we are basically representative of the institutional money that this region is very hungry for. Now, Galton Taggart is the subsidiary that is an investment bank and has a substantial research team that we put in place. So now to go back to the security matters of economic development, I would like to absolutely agree with Georgi Gachechiladze, who said that we cannot afford lower growth. And I'll give a good example of what we mean. On one side, we have Azerbaijan, which is 2 times richer per capita than Georgia is. On the other side, with Turkey, we have an economy on a per capita basis being 3 times larger. And Russia, before the oil crisis, etc., or oil drop prices, used to be 4 times larger, almost 3.5, in nominal terms. And nominal matters in cases when you talk about the cross-border, let's say, flows, etc. Armenia is about the same, so we don't have that difference there. So on the borders, we have a lot of population that have at some point been associated with Georgia or some point been associated historically with Turkey. You have the same on the borders of Azerbaijan and same with Russia, of course, I mean, given the annexations that is taking place right now. So if you don't have better lives for these people, they will economically, not maybe in 10 years, but not in 15 years, but over time, they will be migrating to the more, let's say, richer countries. We have a lot of Georgians that are going to Russia for jobs, etc. Now more and more in Turkey now. So unless we have a vibrant economy now that produces jobs and makes better lives, we are just 4.5 million people. We will disappear. It's a matter of survival. I understand that when we talk about the security measures and about the anti-air missiles, etc., it's an immediate threat, which is 1 year. And this is a long-term threat. If we don't make this economy a vibrant, growing economy, we will just go from 4.5 million to a much smaller number, and then we'll disappear. Because there are huge countries around us. I mean, Turkey is in terms of the economy is about 1 trillion already. Russia, in nominal terms, it used to be 2 trillion, 2.1 trillion. It's huge numbers compared to our 17 billion, and now it's even less given the dollar devaluation. So it's really a survival game, medium to long term. So we cannot afford slow economic growth. We really need to become much better place than the region for us to survive and to flourish. And examples of Singapore, etc., those are places where people wanted to immigrate from the region, including China, badly, because it's such a better quality of life. It didn't start that way, but that is the place. And we have to do the same here. We have to make it much more attractive place to invite people around us to come here and work, etc. So when we talk about limitations of visa regulation, about the work immigration, about making lives harder for the students that come here from India to study here in medical school, etc., it's not just a wrong policy, it's just against the very idea of Georgia's development. So to let's say finish on a positive note, I'll just say that we don't need to be much richer than the region, because it's really a nice place versus a lot of the region. So people like Georgia, people like coming here, and food, weather, people, etc. So we don't need to be 10 times better. If we are about the same, I mean, we have already are in a situation to take further steps after that. But we absolutely need to get there, and it's not hard. With good economic policies, it's doable within a decade. It's not that far away. I mean, doubling and making it 2.5 times, so that it's a good base then to develop from. It's absolutely doable within 1 decade. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for being so succinct. So let me get back to the $1 million question. I mean, you've already begun to answer the $1 million question, but what is the answer to the $1 million question? That is, how do you keep Georgia competitive, make Georgia more competitive?
So to put it in a very simple way is we need to produce goods and services compatible in the Western markets. So that's it. I mean, we need to create wealth by providing and creating competitive goods and services. How we do that? In the 21st century, it's all about educated, free men and women. And despite the fact that we talk a lot about the education, the reality is very different. Our high schools don't give the level of education close to international standards. And according to all the polls, our teenagers graduating from the high schools are already beyond their counterparts and their peers in different countries. And today, in the era of internet and the globalization, They don't compete with each other. They compete with their peers throughout the world. Then they go to get the higher education in this country, and again the level of the higher education, except very small schools that are present, also are far beyond what we need. So what we get is, we get thousands and thousands every year, young people graduating from high schools and graduating from universities who don't have the skills, who don't have the knowledge necessary to create competitive goods and services, and then we require from these people to create exactly this kind of values and the products. Of course, it's impossible. So what is the solution? There's a short-term solution and mid-term solution. In terms of the mid-term, of course, bigger and bigger investments in education is absolutely must. And of course, the election cycles does not coincide with the results from investments in education. Therefore, every single political leadership all the time is basically trying to invest and trying to go in those fields where they have the feedback, immediate feedback for the next elections. And it's absolutely must. We need total internetization of the country. We need English-speaking population 100%, because either you are part of the globalized world or you are isolated. That's A. And with the higher education, I am a little bit more optimistic, because now when the top schools are putting their content online for free, like Stanford, Harvard, MIT, they all put their academic content of the lectures and the sources online for free. It means that if you prepare the high school graduates good enough to get that kind of education and skilled enough, then it's not so expensive today, or it's as cheap as never before, I would say. But we need to tackle the issue of secondary education. But nevertheless, that's a midterm problem. What should we do in the short term? And here, I think that the only solution is to import know-how and technologies. We are talking about the development of the agriculture, where half of our population lives, which is another big challenge. But at the same time, we have only 3 agronomes knowing the modern technologies. That's exactly the case. I'm not exaggerating. If we start to find qualified agronomes for advice, you can find only 3 in the whole country. We are talking about the development of hydropower energy, and the situation is the same. You don't find the engineers who know the modern technologies, who know how things work, with a very challenging world. So, and the same is everywhere. So we have classical structural unemployment. We have on the one hand unemployment, and we have the deficit of the qualified workforce. So the supply and demand does not match. The only solution to that in the short term is to bring as much know-how and knowledge as possible, to import that, so that in the short term provide the knowledge for sustainable development. And that's what many countries did if we look at the Asian tigers of economic miracle, if we look at Chile, if we look to other countries at the early stage of their development, everywhere that was the case. Even more, 1 year ago, head of Bank of England was appointed, was brought from Canada. It's a Canadian guy who is now the central bank governor of Bank of England. And we're talking about the Great Britain, the capital, the financial capital of Europe, one of the biggest capital of the world, the hub of education and so on and so on. But when they needed a person, specific person, who did not have and should not have the ties with the corporate banking sector of UK, they went and imported the knowledge they wanted from Canada. And if UK is doing that, and it's not a problem, it's not a shame, why we cannot do that? I think that's what we should do. We should bring as much know-how and expertise in short term as possible. And the third one is, I can talk about that for 2 days, so it's not that, And the third one is, of course, the second generation reforms. We did as a country a great job in doing business, eliminating corruption, decreasing the tax base, the tax burden, and in many senses that today Georgia is, as Archil mentioned, much better place to live and to do different things, but it's not enough. Now we came to the stage where we need second generation reforms. And there are examples of that, and very, very good example. And I'm not bringing the example of Singapore, Hong Kong, or different developed places. Estonia, which is also post-Soviet Union country, not so long ago in the same level of development as Georgia was. Estonia is doing a great job introducing exactly this kind of reforms. Basically, every second week in the international press, there are articles about the e-government, about the e-residency, about how they develop. This is a country with, as of today, with the lowest debt to GDP in Europe. So if Estonia is doing that, we can do it also. But to do that, we need knowledge and we need know-how. Of course, all the issues with the monetary policy, fiscal policy, will the growth will be 2% or 3%, the budget, that's all very important. But our major problem, I strongly believe, in the fundamental solving of the issues. Otherwise, I don't see any chance of breakthrough. That's, I think, what should be done. Investing in education, bringing the, and importing the technologies and know-how, and second generation reforms in all the fields in the sense of the, more globalization and consolidation of the world.
Thank you. Any members of the panel would like to say something about this issue?
Yeah, I would, yes, absolutely agree with Georgi. This, I would add also some words, because in this case, it's kind of, question that how we should address that, and also kind of look at economic reform side. I think that that's this so-called second generation of reforms are very essential, and in this case, Estonia is also a really very good example. And I guess from my point of view, this is the most important one: how to move forward, how to eliminate or reduce this tax burden further. But in this case, all we understand that this is not easy task if we, on the other hand, take further liabilities on the government side, because in this case, you all understand that all the time we are talking about like huge social spending, huge liabilities that we have in the government in the country. So that's like that should be absolutely agree with the main principles, fundamentals that should take place. On the other hand, we have to have really very clear vision how we address that, and the government has to have the clear policy in this regard. And I think that that's kind of really very important match to each other.
I'll just mention a couple of the things on a positive side that Georgia has versus all the countries surrounding us. Our tax to GDP is only 25%, so it's very low. I mean, taxes are very low. and that's good to have. So we are already at a point which, with that measure, is a very attractive place. Crime per capita is the lowest in the region. I don't know the Azeri statistics, quite frankly, but for sure, I mean, used to be on a European level as well, but it's still quite low. And in terms of regulations and many other measures in terms of ease of doing business, etc., it's already a very attractive place to do business. So now we need to develop, of course, develop the e-governance and do a lot of good things in terms of what Estonia has done and other countries have done. But some of the other things that needs to get done are very basic. Basically, it's pushing, and it should come from the top. It's pushing the bureaucrats not to enlarge their influence, because that tendency is, I think somebody mentioned here, that every bureaucrat tends to try to increase their influence, and we see that on too many places now, and that's a dangerous trend. We should change that, vice versa. It should be focused on cutting the bureaucracy rather than allowing it to grow with whatever pretext. Thank you.
We have questions from the audience. So, back.
Yuri Pretzlik, NATO Liaison Office. I would like to thank you very much for your contributions. It was very interesting. However, I think we forgot one very important point. You all covered, let's say, microeconomics perspective, right? But I think there's one huge problem in Georgian economy, and that's the dollarization of the economy, right? That's something that actually strikes a foreigner coming to Georgia. When I came here a year and a half ago, I bought a car for dollars, but the currency is lari. I pay the rent in dollars too, even though the currency is lari. I speak to our local employees, and they get the mortgages, loans, everything tied to dollars. So in the last couple of months, actually their mortgages, I mean, they earn money in lari, but they pay the mortgages tied in dollars. So actually their mortgages got expensive, like by 1/3. And that's kind of, I think we're moving in a circle here, because there's basic mistrust into your own currency, which means that the institution don't trust the currency, you don't trust the currency, and you don't take the mortgage, loans, you don't buy anything big in your currency, because you either don't want to, you don't trust the currency, or you're not allowed by the institutions, by the system actually. So my question is, what is the way out of it? Okay? And I'm at like personal experience. I'm a Czech citizen, so I was born in a communist country, Czechoslovakia, and I remember very clearly at the beginning of 1990s, like the economic changes, all of these issues. But I remember that we have never had anything counted in any foreign currency. It was always in Czechoslovakian and then Czech crown. And I think it's because we trusted the currency, and the institutions trusted the currency. So my question is how to get out of this, how to solve this problem. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We don't trust lari, but in God we trust, right? That's what your question was about. Yeah, we do trust in God, basically. Yes, dollarization is a big challenge, but I will not put it in the way of trust. First of all, let's diagnose where we are coming from and what was happening in early 90s. From 1989 to 1994, Georgia lost 70% of our economy. 70. That's, according to different estimations, more than Germany lost after the World War II. In 1989, Georgia, Turkey, Poland, Bulgaria had the same GDP per capita as Georgia. And after 5 years, it was a ruined country, basically. There's the Abkhazian war, First Ossetian war, civil war. You can create a textbook what countries should not do and you can put everything that we have done. And in this process was also introduction of local currency called coupon, which had the hyperinflation. And I'll not bring the detailed figures. I think it will be boring just to tell you that at the introduction, the exchange rate was 1.3, and in 2 years, it was $1 was worth 1.3 million coupons. So super high inflation. 250 banks and total bank run, and 70% of our population losing their last savings. That is the result that we had when we approached 1996. Corruption and all these issues, crime, this is not even comparable through what we have gone. Of course, trust to the government, trust to any single institution, including the local currency, was absolutely zero. So dollar became the saving currency, and basically, as of today also, what we are battling and what we are struggling is to introduce and to get the de-dollarization going down. Now, it's very, very similar situation. There are several countries, and when you talk about the Czechia and Slovakia and Czechoslovakia, I think that the story is very, very different. The geopolitics is very different, and of course the trust to the institution from the very beginning is very different. But there are very successful examples of de-dollarization in 3 countries, basically, where we can say it. It's Israel, it's Poland, and Chile, where dollarization rate came down from 75%, 80% to very low levels. I was talking with my colleague in Israel, for instance, and says that in late 70s, the same was in Israel. And today, what is the exchange rate of shekel and dollar is not an issue. And if you stop a person in the street, many of them don't know that, because everything now is counting in shekels. What is our strategy and what are our results? We managed so far that people started to have the confidence in the banking system. And with the institutional memories that we had, believe me, that's not an easy job. Today, people are not worried of putting their savings in the banks. And that's in the results. Basically, banking sector 15 years ago was 1 billion lari. Today it's 22 billion. Why? Because people started to believe in the banking institutions. Non-resident deposits are growing, so non-residents started to believe in our system and in our banking part. Now, to get from this point to the point where lari becomes a saving currency, because if it does not become the saving currency, banks lend the money in the currency, they get the savings, right? So if they don't get the lari savings, they cannot lend the lari because they don't have it. Otherwise, they take the foreign currency risk. For the last 2 years, the dollarization percentage is 20%. So basically, we for the last 3 years, basically, we came from 75 to 62%. It's still very high, and it still is built on the confidence. But all these examples of Israel, Chile, and Poland, these are examples where they had long-term stable growth. So basically, 15, 20 years of stable growth. It's impossible to build up the currency, to build up the confidence in local currency if you go like this every 3-5 years. All the time, when you have long-term growth coming up with the structural economy we'll have the tendency and we'll have the pressure on appreciation of the currency. And when people look the decade of appreciation, they start to believe more and they start to save in the same currency. Is it a challenging situation? Yes, definitely. That's a challenging situation, and it's one of the toughest issues that we are facing. But should we introduce administrative measures? No, I'm not a believer of administrative prohibition that now many people are advocating. And a very good example is several of our neighbors, where they had the dollarization rate of 40%, and when they had the economic shock, basically dollarization jumped from 40% to 70% within weeks. So if there is no fundamental trust, it's very hard to reach the point. Today we have a great result in the confidence in banking institutions. According to the Gallup polls, I mean it's funny, but still, according to the Gallup polls, trust in banking institution is third in Europe, after Norway and Switzerland. Yeah. People forgot what it is a bankrupt bank, what it is a lost saving. And that's a very important brick, it's a fundament where we should go. But now we need strong, consequent growth in order to achieve all the stages that we want. And just finally, I want also to bring the example how much psychological it is. People who have deposits in euros, they don't count how much they lost or gained towards the US dollars. Somebody has a deposit of 10,000 euros and they have a deposit of 10,000 euros. It doesn't matter what is the exchange rate towards the dollar, yen, or franc. When somebody has a deposit in lari, they all the time calculate how much they are losing towards the US dollar, or how much basically after the depreciation their deposit is worth in US dollars. And as of today, lari savers and lari depositors are very unhappy, and euro depositors don't care. And the reality is that euro and lari has depreciated exactly the same way compared to US dollars. So if lari depositor will compare their saving to euro, nothing has changed. If you compare to, I can bring in other currencies where they can gain, but you know, they have gained, but that's a different story. So it's all about the confidence, I totally agree. It's all about the psychological dependence. Even though dollar is not the major trading currency of Georgia. Only 25, it's a transaction currency, but only 25% of our trade comes in dollars. Why we are not expecting high inflation despite the 30% devaluation towards the dollar? Because towards almost all our major trading partners, lari has not depreciated or appreciated even. So if we are getting back to the issue, we need consequent growth of a decade or two to solve these issues. I'm not talking about the different instruments that we are trying to create to promote the lari mortgages and lari loans. It's getting better, but still, there is a long way to go, definitely. I know it was a big answer, but that's you hit my very, very painful part. So.
Thank you. It was very interesting to listen to you. Some of you may not know, but FT named Gachechiladze as the best governor of National Bank. We see why. But to mention, I mean, the question was about how the leverage in lari terms has grown for some of your employees and how that changes and their expenditure, and how that's a closed cycle in terms of where does that all this money come from of all the people that are levered. for everybody there's levered, there's a depositor. So as banks are intermediate between the two players, in US dollar terms, not much has changed for the banks. I mean, they receive in lari terms, for US dollar terms, 25% more money, but they pay out also 25% more to their depositors. So that money didn't disappear. It's just the ones that were the savers are the winners in lari terms. The ones that are the ones that had the loans are the ones in lari terms that have lost. Now, so overall, what has happened, that money doesn't disappear from the country, just that the leverage level has gone up in lari terms of the system. And given the fact that the system is not very levered, it's just dealing with the individual cases and making sure that their payments could be prolonged enough so that it's not painful for them in the short term to deal with such issues. And all major banks have announced that they're ready to do that.
My name is zaza, chelidze. I represent USAID G4G project as a PMCG at the same time. Thank you very much to all speakers for very interesting discussions. So you covered almost all of the main important topics and issues of the Georgian economy today. As it has been mentioned many times, so we all know that Georgia has conducted very successful reforms during the last decade by trade liberalization, deregulation, and simplification and taxation, etc., etc. And all these reforms resulted 6%, almost close to 6% average real growth, GDP growth rate like during last years. And today, when Georgian economics has problems like slowdown, and Georgian government needs immediate reforms, immediate action in order to stimulate Georgian economy. Together with all the fundamental reforms has been mentioned by Mr. Gachechiladze, what kind of special measures should be taken by Georgian government even in the short term in order to stimulate the Georgian slowdown? I would like to hear your opinion on this issue.
Coming from my mandate, constitutional mandate as a governor of central bank, I'm not free to discuss the policies of what government should do and how it should do, because I mean we are in a daily talks and negotiations. So basically, I don't comment publicly on that issues, but we are very lucky that we have the former Minister of Finance here, so he can substitute.
I will comment on that. So I already mentioned some measures that should take place immediately in 2015 and as soon as possible from both sides. This is regulatory framework of the economy, which is still under pressure, and we need to have a clear vision how government intends to further deregulate the economy, not vice versa. And that's one, and that covers not only just general licensing, permitting stuff. This is just overall regulatory framework, including labor migration part, which is already correctly mentioned here during our session, that we need to have environment when we can bring foreign specialists without any impediment. This is really very important, and that's the huge impact that will have a huge impact on the economy. The second one is adjustment of the policies to the current situation that we have right now. So far, fiscal is not adjusted, which is which creates some danger to the macroeconomic stability, because I think that this is very important. We need to realize that we have a serious slowdown of the economy, slowdown versus what we expected, and now we need to reshape our expectations and to make it as realistic as possible, because this is very important. This is not just a matter of matter of numbers. This is a matter of overall economic functioning. Let me tell you, for example, if tax revenue stays on the same level, that means that tax authority has to collect these tax revenues. And if the economy cannot generate the amount that they want, they are increasing the pressure on that. That's what usually happens, not only in Georgia only, but in other countries as well. So when the pressure is getting increased, then that hurts the economy further. So that means, like, you know, this is like vicious circle when you are getting into this trap, and the only way to get out from this is to look at the situation realistically, say that, you know, we will not have the same growth rate that we expected. So this is what we have right now. So they have to adjust all these kind of revenue side as well as the spending side on a proper way. So this is immediate action. And the next one is spending side, where we have still unclear liabilities, especially with this universal healthcare insurance, right? So universal is the proper way.
It's not insurance.
Whatever, yes. So this is the liability, and unclear liability still, because we don't know exactly how much that costs. We don't know. We just know that this is something general. We calculate that in budget, we estimate that and put it in budget, but we don't know exactly how much will be the claims in this year. We don't know how that will hurt the expenditure side. So these are some minds that we have, and we need to be careful in this regard. So that's my question. Sorry if I did too much.
I'll just add that something that Business Association has been talking a lot with the government is to establish a body that would do the assessment of any new regulation or law coming into force, how that affects the businesses and the economy. That just to have that discipline and the structure that somebody issues a report and support or veto any new regulation and say, okay, what kind of impact that will have. It's impact assessment from the economic point of view, which is absolutely necessary.
Excuse me, maybe I will add something. I think that the idea that was also, this idea comes from Estonia as well, that when profit tax was eliminated, and I guess that might be also in a medium term. I mean, this is not immediate action, like that cannot be just done very frequently, but very fast. But you know, I think that the idea of it to somehow to reduce the tax burden further and make a more reliable environment for businesses, that might be the serious boost of the economy, so the instrument to boost the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your excellent presentations. Just a very short note on currency. I also remember Soviet ruble. It was so trustable that people were going to jail because just for exchanging it for the dollars, but it did not much help Soviet economy. My question is a little bit on a different side. So if you are sitting in New York in a hedge fund, and then you are thinking of investing outside your country, first thing you are looking at, of course it's necessary, it's important, and it's absolutely necessary prerequisite that regulations are good and well, the taxes are low. But the first two things hedge fund is asking about is the political stability and security. That's how they making decisions. So basically, one thing is what government should do and should not. Second, what is the role of the private sector to advance countries' objectives, such as strengthening security, NATO integration, and so on and so on? What they should do better to emerge as a player in the politics. The size of the state, of Georgian state, is huge. It's been problem with the previous government, it is problem with the current government, that the size is overwhelmingly big. And also the mostly businesses are trying to play according to these rules. What they should do better to emerge as a player that is setting and influencing policies, state policies, and advancing the country's security objectives. Well, they are doing some activities, but I mean, what can make them as a policymaker? Also, I'm especially interested in a comment on this from Alex.
I'll just say what we say and what I say during the presentations with investors on investor days in the different capitals, including financial capitals, I mean, including New York. The question is that, and it's obvious question when investors usually say, okay, we like you, you did a good job reforming the country, all what you have mentioned, but what happens if tomorrow Russia will start a war with you? And before 2008, my reply was, it's less likely to happen. After 2008, I said this risk already materialized. So you don't have to worry about that, it already happened. But yeah, definitely, that's a big question, which every single sophisticated investor is asking. That's why there is no other way than the NATO membership. In my personal view, there is no alternative to that, because NATO membership is, for me as a foreign economist, it's not about the, it's of course about security, but it's not about the direct war kind of security. It's first of all the very fundament of economic growth. Because without eliminating the political risk factor, of course it's very hard, it's much harder to attract portfolio investors and sophisticated investors. And yeah, that's a question that we need to answer all the time. Nevertheless, if we manage for the last 10 years to attract these people, if we managed that half of our banking system, more than half of our banking system, basically largest bank and second largest bank, both listed in London Stock Exchange and with a very diversified ownership, we can do it. But of course, it's much tougher than with other means. But maybe my colleague will help me with the tough questions.
Yes,
Larry was the easier question. So.
Yeah, I also agree that this is really a very difficult question because it's not. I mean, we all know that there is no leverage within the private sector, right? So there is no instrument. There are no instruments to impact on or influence on the policy. But on the other hand, I think that the most problematic one is somehow still this attempt from the government to over-regulate stuff. And I think that the private sector's role in this case should be to be organized as much as possible to prevent that. It's difficult to say how, but I guess, you know, some, I don't know, business associations, some kind of interaction with the government, or somehow some kind of pressure on the governments, so that, you know, we avoid those bureaucratic pressure or attempts to over-regulate the economy, which we see almost every day. I mean, from different sides. I mean, I saw one article in a newspaper just a couple of days ago when APM Terminals, which is one of the biggest investors in Georgia, they are managing Potis port. They had some project to reshape one of the part of the seaport, and they asked for the permit for this to Poti municipality, and Poti municipality refused to give this permit without any clear reason for them. I don't know. And when there was the small comment of Poti mayor saying that they received a letter from some kind of youth organization of Poti questioning the privatization process of Poti Seaport, I don't know, several years ago. And that's the reason why they are not giving this permit to these APM terminals, which is, you understand, ridiculous. This is not acceptable at all. I mean, because that's the signal that this is dangerous. This is investments in Georgia is getting dangerous, and in this case, of course, there has to be really very huge pressure on that. I think that this, from private sector, some kind of from my point of view, there has to be some speak up. I mean, they has to just say some serious protest on that. Otherwise, that will become more and more difficult. That's my.
Thanks. If I understood the question correctly, you asked what should private sector do for more NATO integration of the country and policy forming, etc. I think the answer is very simple: nothing. It's not private sector's job. I mean, private sector's job is to profit maximize in a long-term manner, sustainable long-term manner. So that means that they will fight they would fight for their cause of less regulation, less taxation, etc. And that's all they can do, and it's good enough. If you create a strong private sector, that's a great basis for more taxes, for stronger state, etc., etc. But it's not private sector's job to interfere in the foreign policy tactics or strategy of the state. We should not be asking that from private sector.
You can be the donors.
We are donors for the state in terms of taxation, right?
Yes, I do want to point out here, this is true democracy, since the person with the microphone is deciding who gets to ask the question rather than the chair. With a mic. I had no role in that. I'm just pointing this out. This is very You guys control everything. Okay, please, go ahead.
Thank you. Georgi Oniani from Transparency International, Georgia. Thank you very much for brilliant presentations and interventions. So I have a brief comment and 2 questions. I would like to take up the point which Archil and Georgi said about the competitiveness which we need to kind of promote and strengthen, and this is the only way we can foster, right, and attract investment into this country. And it also has another aspect, which is, I would say, directly linked to the security, which is like only through competitiveness and attractiveness we can win back the hearts and minds of our citizens in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. So this is also has kind of a direct connection with the security. In this connection, I have one question which to all of the panelists. What do you think, should there be any special policies towards those regions? I mean, economic policies or some special targeted policies to integrate those regions economically more into Georgia? This is first question. And the second question is with regards to the importance of government financial statistics. I don't know whether you've been following or not, but in the last weeks, Transparency International has published a note where we kind of illustrated that the Ministry of Finance has basically misrepresented the budget deficit figure. So my question is it really so important that the government should really pay attention to kind of putting specific and very precise figures on their websites? Does it really have such an importance with the international donors or international institutions? Thank you.
Can I answer? So first one is I mean, more integration economically there is probably the better, but how realistic that is given the Russia's policy there is another question, and I'm no expert in that, so I'm not going to continue talking on it. And the second question was yeah, in terms of the deficit and the trust in the numbers, it's absolutely vital. I mean, if the investors start questioning the numbers that are coming from the government, it's the end. We will not be able to convince the investors to invest in this country, and we've brought a lot of capital to this country, and this country needs more capital and smarter capital, etc. And we will not be able to do it. So I would like to thank Transparency International for the good job that you are doing, and you have been doing for many years, and it's very, very important, absolutely. So it is vital that there's trust in the numbers, and that's the basic to build on. If you don't have the basic, you can have a beautiful building, but it may fall. It's really the fundamental. Thank you.
Yes, I will be very brief. So with conflict zones, I agree with the approach that we need to further integrate, but at the same time we have specific circumstances there. It's not realistic at this particular moment, I guess. The only way is to have some approach in terms of social or humanitarian kind of interrelationship. I don't know whether this is healthcare or some other irrigation or agriculture or some other particular aspects. Otherwise, I don't think that there is the environment where we can play a significant role there. That's one. The second is that the same. I mean, I fully agree with Archil. This is really very important, and I think this is really very specific issue that the government has to be very precise in that. That's for sure.
I'll just add that I think that what we can do and should be doing is not as much economic integration, but if we create a quality healthcare system with a high quality, and what we basically are witnessing in many ways when the matter deals with the healthcare, people tend to forget many things, and we witness a situation where population from occupied territories are coming to the other part of Georgia for the healthcare treatment, and I think that's a very important thing, and I think we must stimulate that and promote that as much as possible. And secondly, I would be, in my personal view, again, getting back to the education, I would pay or subsidize the study of the youth and young people of these regions in Tbilisi. I think that would be a very, very important thing. And these two directions, basically, at the stage today, would be enough. I think that's very important things to do. Regarding the statistics, you know, there's tax avoidance and tax evasion, and many people don't make the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion. And in reality, tax avoidance is a good thing, where the tax advisors are given bonuses, and tax evasion is a crime, which are punishable by the law. So, yes, that's always a very thin corridor. But I think this is also a very healthy process where there's a strong watchdogs who don't allow any single mistakes to happen. And I think many people understood or learned what the budget deficit is after this publicity, because I doubt that many people didn't know what was all about. But anyways, there's always a good side to that. But transparency is, of course, very, very important. It's absolutely crucial.
Thank you, Bat Utelia, Atlantic Council of Georgia. Thanks for an excellent panel discussion. My question is, I have a comment and a question. The comment is about if we look at the simplified triangle of the government, civil society, and the private sector, in Georgian case, the private sector positions itself more closely to the government than to the civil society. And I think that is the core of the problem, why private sector is reluctant to play a role in policy formulation, whether it would be foreign, economic, or security policy. And I do not agree with the statement that private sector has nothing to do with policy formulation. They have a role, and significant role, if they are willing, and the future in terms of the successfully developing the public policies lies on the active participation of private sector. Now my question is on the potential stability signals for our economy. United States is the key strategic partner for Georgia. Strategic partnership with the US comprises several pillars, and one of the pillars is economic and trade relations. But if we look on the foreign direct investments from the United States, it equals the same amount as from the Luxembourg in Georgia. So it's inadequately low comparing to the level of political engagement with the United States. So while we have the OPEC, Overseas Private Investor Corporation, investing in different business activities in Georgia, we have a significantly low activity of the Exim Bank, which is also the reflection of the policy or the political engagement of the United States in Georgia. So what should be done for the creating the wider avenues for attracting this capital? That would be a signal for stability. Other businesses who sits in New York in a hedge fund and thinking of finding other creative ways of investing in a different potentially beneficial areas. Thank you.
My first reply is again, I think we should all agree that our entrepreneurs lack the skills to do the business in a Western world, in a Western manner. So it's a very logical source why we have this problem, and we need to support that. But I think what should we do is we should not be afraid to have the extraordinary steps in this direction. It's not popular, I know, when talking about the democracy, to name some of the reforms of the Chile or Singapore. Nevertheless, there's an example of Chile when basically to promote the wine export of Chilean wine to international markets, all the embassies of Chile were given the task that their job is to promote the export capacity of Chilean wine. And it played a role. I think that here also some government institutions, some public institutions should have the very active role of promoting Georgian businesses. And promoting Georgian businesses and giving them the know-how and skills is very important. I think government should have also some, to create the forums where all this is discussed, because I know you have been personally involved with a case where there was an offers of NATO contracts, but there was no local firms who were able to satisfy this thing. So there was a concrete offers. Basically, you don't have the sales risk, and what you would find is you would find the suppliers jumping to get the contract, but that was not the case. So yeah, we do have the big challenge in this case, and we do have the structural problems of our economy. And we need to work very hard in that direction.
When we talk about the professionalism of private sector, and that was mentioned many times, not just now but a few years ago, something like is boiling inside me. Just to say that when we talk about the private sector professionalism, maybe we overlook a number of things, but also maybe we don't understand the professionalism of the other parts of the civil society, be it the government, NGOs, or the etc. I don't agree that I mean, we may not be the best versus our more developed colleagues in the West, but we certainly are at par with the rest of the society overall as a representative of the business segment. To go back to the question of what can the government do to support the EXIM, I don't know. It's really the private sector to develop to a level where they apply to EXIM Bank projects. I mean, we have had EXIM Bank project that was then replaced by the producers financing by itself because the EXIM was a little bit bureaucratic. I mean, their requirements are much tougher. OPIC has made it softer for Georgia, and probably it could be done. Same could be done on the EXIM side. Because we were dealing with importing John Deere products through export financing structure, and EXIM was very hard to deal with. So then John Deere came up with their own in-house financing for longer term for export finance. So what could be done? Probably some kind of intermediation on a government level, like it has been done for OPIC, to soften some of the requirements for Georgia.
Okay, so I will comment on that as well. You know, we have to realize and understand that Georgia's economy is really very small, and this is not attractive for U.S. investors in general as a market size. In this case, if they really want to attract investors from the United States, real investors from not politically driven investors, but investors with real economic purposes, business purposes, then they have to have in mind that this is not Georgia's economy they are investing, but they are investing in some global part of the kind of bigger part of the economy, which is the part of global economy. That might be, I don't know, Caucasus plus Central Asia plus Middle East plus maybe Russia plus maybe some Eastern European countries or something like that. So this is the point that Georgi started. I mean, we need to have bigger competitiveness in this regard. We have to play the role of hub to attract U.S. investors. Otherwise, they will not come. That's the most important issue. So that's why government has to pay more attention on that rather than just try to grab or bring or attract politically driven investments.
Hi, I'm Steve Haken from USAID. When we talk about the nexus between economic growth and security as part of this conference, particularly in U.S. government circles or in discussions with the government of Georgia, we often look at the strategic location of Georgia vis-a-vis potential trade with Central Asia and points beyond in the East. So my question for the panelists is, what do you see as the short-term and medium-term prospects for growth in that kind of trade, and what can Georgia do to optimize its advantages from its position?
Definitely, if you ask me what are the 5 sectors of economy which will lead to growth in the next 5-10 years, I can name it basically logistics, tourism, financial sector, construction, and agriculture, energy, 6. These are the 6 logistics, international trade, of course, logistics. So these are the sectors that must lead to the growth. Of course, in that direction, all that's been discussed in terms of the quick access to different sources of capital, regulation, and so on is absolutely necessary. In one sentence, the challenge of our economy is a low productivity. I understand that Archil didn't like, but I didn't mean the professionalism of Archil, basically, because you get the investors, no, I'm joking. you get the investors from UK and US without problem. What I'm to package it in a way that you like is that the problem is the low productivity. Low productivity means that compared to more developed markets, our output with the same input is lower than others, and we need to increase that to create bigger volume. But of course, well, again, to name it again, energy sector, hydropower energy, tourism, logistics, financial sector, construction, these are the sectors that will be driving growth in the next 5-10 years.
I think that also very, from my point of view, the problematic issue will be the process of DCFTA implementation. And in this case, I would pay more attention on DCFTA implementation as well, because the further step forward to integration into Europe and diversification of our trade is the solution. That's why we have to prevent all the impediments that might be in the process of DCFTA implementation.
Nat Oberoshvili, USAID G4G. First of all, thank you very much for the great presentations. It is very interesting. If I may comment, I think I would like to build upon what was already said. Economic development is not possible without investment, whether it's local or foreign investment. And investors are looking for predictability, whether it's political or economic. And as you correctly said, it should be a long-term vision where a country goes. So I see there are three main elements here. First is the long-term economic development vision. As you mentioned, which sectors would be developed, and you mentioned 6 sectors, which I completely agree. The second aspect is consistent policies, whether it's subsidized agriculture or not subsidized agriculture, but it should be consistent. It shouldn't be today we have one policy, one approach, and the day after that, I mean, it's a different approach. So, and the third main element, I think, is the consultations, the consultative process where all the policies, and including the DCFTA and association agreements, requirements, compliance, and all the regulations should be consulted with the private sector and civil society stakeholders. So there is a certain freedom in adjusting these regulations to the local realities in order to make them more acceptable to the local environment. So I would see that these three main elements are important components for the foreign or local investors. I mean, do you agree with that? Do you agree with this general approach?
I think it's impossible not to agree. Consistency is very important, and consultations is very important, basically. The good thing is that this kind of forums actually is ideal place exactly for the discussion of these issues. And I think the more these kind of forums will be happening, and more the government participation will be here, more the active civil society and the private sector will be, the more harder will be to make wrong decisions. And that's, I think, very important. But definitely, I think that's the right way to go. I cannot bring any argument against what can be done.
Agree. So I just want to put it in a larger context, because the previous question was also, you know, what are the sectors that we're looking at and that we expect more development. I agree with Georgi. There are other service sectors that could develop overall, but rather than naming the sectors and pinpointing exactly if it's education or private schooling or whatever that will attract the regional students, or it's the healthcare, which is already happening, attracting regional flows, or transport, etc. I would say in general terms that we see Georgia's development to the next step as a service economy for the region. And that includes a lot of different things, and whatever the government can do for more flows to happen is great. So let's say one of the things that has been done is the visa-free crossing. So government can be very careful and pay attention how free that flow is. You know, if there are queues to manage those things, like small things we think, but they matter. Same kind of thing when people coming in, if there are queues in the airport, or if their days in Georgia are counted for 20 minutes, and those kind of things, to pay attention that doesn't happen. On a more specific case with transport, one of the biggest next thing is probably going to be the South Corridor's competitiveness versus Russia's corridor, where there's a deep sea port that is being developed, but on the other side there's interoperability issues with Azerbaijan's railway in terms of the capacity when the capacity increases, and there's also further down interoperability with the Kazakhstan ports there. So if there's anything that the government can do there to make sure those issues are raised and put forward, it would probably be beneficial.
You know, I need guidance. Can we do finish these questions? Is that okay? Sure. Okay. So we have 1, 2, 3 more questions.
Thank you. Irina Kwachata from Business Association of Georgia. I have a comment and a question. My comment is that Business Association unites 70 large companies, and we do participate in the policy creation as far as the government and the existing system allows us. And my question is that we talk about the economic security of the country, and we have the neighbor Russia. And 3 years ago, we did a lot of work, the government, to open up the market of the Russia, which is quite attractive and interesting in terms of short-term return. However, it also puts quite a big risk to the long-term security of the country. My question is, what is the role of the government to mitigate this risk? Thank you.
Well, I think that we should, before 2006, Russia was the largest trade partner of Georgia. It constituted 45% of our trade, and it disappeared in one day. Our dependence energy-wise is also in the past, and we are as independent as possible. Before the last year, when the Russian market opened up, it's small returns, beneficial, and so on and so on. I think that if some companies want to benefit from exporting to Russian market, of course, there is no problem for that, but the role of the government is to remind the history, short-term history, all the time, and to not to forget that Russian market is a very different mechanism out of the free market economy. And it's open up one day, close down the second day, open up the third day, close down the fourth day. So at the end of the day, midterm and the long-term strategy is, of course, diversifying free trade with the EU. Fortunately, free trade with US someday. But in terms of the short term, I think it's up to the private sector to decide whether or not to take the risk and to go on these risks, or so on and so on. In case of central bank, we closely monitor that our banking sector does not leverage too much those companies that take the risk of the Russian market, so that basically it does not grow to the bigger problem when it closes down. It's purely from the regulator perspective. Otherwise, yes, that's the issue.
Also, I guess that might be a case for WTO as well. Frankly, I don't know. I think that we've never used this tool as a tool to complain in WTO not only Georgia, but Moldova as well, Ukraine as well, and other countries as well. So it can be used as a tool as well, but it's really very difficult issue now to answer whether that tool will work or not. It's really very difficult to say something.
I agree with Georgi. The answer is nothing. It's up to private sector to make such risks, and it's up to the banking and the regulator, etc., to follow that risk or not. But kind of interfering in that, then you interfere in a lot of different things. So, yeah, basically promote other export markets, yes. But in terms of, if your question was towards the fact that should the government somehow limit this kind of participation, then I would say the government should not interfere. And this is high-risk market, high return for some people, and you should not interfere. They make some money, but then they lose money. It's their choice.
So, question in the back. Okay, we're not running out of
Gachechiladze, Chief Financial Officer, GMT Group. The question of the issue of the investment was rightly touched up because it's like a very fundamental component of the macroeconomic picture. But I would like to very briefly ask you about another fundamental component of the economy, it's exports. In your opinion, what are the comparative advantages of Georgia as of today?
With regard to the in terms of the exports, the figures are basically our imports are $8.2 billion, our export is $4 billion, so our trade deficit is $4.2 billion. So the export is twice less than the imports that we have, and I think it shows that our competitive advantage existing is not that good. But I think that the CFTA and free trade with the EU that we are talking about is not that there is immediate companies that will start to export to the EU market. Let's not forget that we had the GSP Plus, which is free trade for the 3,000 items, and it was not working. But what the free trade can give us is that we can basically advertise our country with a easy doing business country with all its components. With a free trade on the other hand, that means that for the other investors in the Southeast Asia, Turkey, China, Europe, US, whatever, that they can bring up and set up the industry in Georgia and then export from Georgia to those markets. Well, I don't think we have very cheap labor force. I agree, I understand what the remark is, that there are processing industries, for instance, textile industries and other industries, which tend to migrate from more sophisticated markets to less sophisticated market, and we need to be on this migration route. For instance, Turkey has publicly declared that textile is not a priority anymore. They want to switch to more high added value segments, which for Georgia definitely is an opportunity that we need, because this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. We do have several players already, but that's all the segments of these things to do. This is a big question, the question of competitiveness. We cannot afford to lose our competitiveness. Otherwise, we don't use this DCFTA. We only get the more and more regulations and no benefits from that, which may distort the market fully.
In reality, I think that we have three main one. This is location, this is business environment, and this is partnership with EU and US. If we look at the region, I guess that's the comparative advantage that we have for investors to invest in this country.
Tamar Ginturashvili Media Development Foundation. Lexo mentioned this 40 Meyer case, and I wonder whether it is a typical picture within our bureaucracy and whether bureaucrats are afraid to make decisions to issue licenses, permits, and how political persecution or the persecution perceived as political one, and I don't mean just formal official cases, but investigation against the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Agriculture under the new ruling party affects behavior of bureaucracy.
I would not generalize this particular case, frankly, because that's just one particular article that I saw, but this is still really very, very important, because even one particular case with such a huge investor as APM Terminals is, so it's kind of really very, very damaging to the economy. That's why I cannot just generalize it. I cannot say that, you know, this is just overall manner of bureaucracy working in the economy, but that's also kind of signal that we have to pay attention as much as possible.
I'll comment. I will generalize it, because I know many cases where the dependency on local municipality has made the projects delayed or impossible to implement. Some of the cases, the requests are absolutely unreasonable, and probably one thing the state could do, and we will be suggesting that, is to organize some kind of seminars for the local governance officials in the basic economics and business, because there's some issues like that. There are requests that don't make sense, and it's difficult to comprehend, and there's only one way to deal. I mean, given the new laws, they have a lot of power in terms of building permits, etc. It's all issued on the local level, and while we complain about the quality of business people in the country, there's also issues with the quality of local municipality professionals. So one thing should probably, I mean, we were thinking a lot about is what to do is probably for the government or NGO. For an NGO, that would be a beautiful idea, in fact, to organize seminars in different things, including economics and what businesses bring for the overall country in terms of, and municipality in terms of property tax and employment, some of those things.
Again, we are not complaining about the lack of quality. We are complaining the lack of number of qualified businesses. That's a different thing.
Thank you very much. Gachechiladze, Associate Professor of the International Aleksishvili University. This, first of all, thank you very much. It was interesting for so interesting answers and presentations. With your permission, my question is related to the energy sector of Georgia. You mentioned about the different sectors of Georgia, which would be priority. What do you think about the rational consumption of hydro power on the territory of Georgia, taking into consideration that only about 15% of the Georgian hydro resources are used, but at the same time, in case of using the whole hydro potential in Georgia, Georgia would be able to produce about 150 billion cubic kilowatt hours of electricity, with the perspective of the export of this one of the most expensive, in my point of view, product. And what the government should do and private sector should do by this way for the development of the energy sector of Georgia, and also taking into consideration that about 70% of the producing the electricity in Georgia is coming on the hydropower stations. Should be the energy one of the backbone of the economy of Georgia. Thank you very much.
We produce very detailed reports research reports on the hydro industry and the regulation and the tariffs, etc. So we do a lot of analysis of that sector. Government has done a lot already for that sector development. And one of the more recent initiatives, which was one of the very big positives that I've heard recently, is that approval of high voltage line infrastructure development for the next 10 years, because that allows for the private sector to plan some of the hydros. We ourselves, our group, we are involved in building several small hydros, medium, 30, 20 megawatts. And in that, we see a big potential. Some of the numbers you mentioned, though, seem very large. So right now, out of 10 billion kilowatts, about 8 or 8.5 are produced by hydro in Georgia, and there's a potential to triple, maybe quadruple that. And while everybody talks about how it will be a big exporting thing for Georgia, it's one of the things that we need to worry about is that local consumption is growing quite significantly, and those projects take a long time for delivery. So it's not only a potential, but absolute necessity to support such developments. And what government could do is probably be more forceful in some of the local municipality cases which are objecting such developments.
All right, last question. All right, next to the last question.
Gachechiladze, I said Policy Institute. From the very beginning, you correctly mentioned that to be competitive and to maintain our attractiveness, we should not copy-paste regulations. I also think that we should not even implement modified and adjusted regulations in a very short period of time. But eventually, if we are going towards Europe, we need some regulations to take place, but there is no rush. We can do it across years in a less harmful way. So my question is, what would you suggest? How can government prioritize what regulations to implement first, and how to measure whether country is ready for this or that regulation?
I think that if you have a very small bureaucracy, basically, if you don't have the people to do it, that's the best prevention. Because if you have a bureaucrat without job description, then the bureaucrat creates a job description for himself. And usually this job description is finding different international methodology organizations saying this is how it's there, how the things are different, and so on and so on. Just to understand how tough that is that basically banking sector is the most regulated sector of Georgia. And I think the only that much regulated sector. And in case of banking, we are fully compliant with all the obligations that DCFTA brings. This is Basel II, 3 principles of supervision and all other aspects. Basically, there is nothing in terms of the banking regulation that we need to adopt. In some cases, bank complains that we are doing much more than we are in much advanced situation than others. But in order to have this kind of regulations, there is a special institute, right? The central bank, where people work solely on this issue. And of course, to implement, I think the big mistake will be to compromise, because there are approaches like, say, let's create a small institution or agency, and just to tick that we did the first step, and we can advance, but then this agency will not be as much effective, so that it will not place additional burden to the economy. And I think this approach is very, very big mistake, because whenever you create the agency, even 3 people work there, let's imagine, what will happen is that these 3 people will start to find the lobbies and the allies to become effective. And it's not that it's a good person or bad person. It's just somebody paid for that. I mean, you just don't hire somebody for not doing anything, right? You don't say that. So if you say that, for instance, there is the labor inspection or some other inspections, and this is a DCFTA thing, we just create a small agency just to advance. I guarantee that every next time, the bureaucrat in this agency will try to create to come up with job description. So I think that the prevention is, first of all, there's a high-level team working on the priorities, and these priorities must be decided purely on the very high-level team. That's very, very important. If you delegate the issues of priorities to mid-level, then you'll receive a big mess. So A would be that this decision-making is very, very high level, what is the priorities, and B is not to create somebody's and not to create places which in the future will implement that. The lower is the number of bureaucrats, the less people are to do wrong things. That's what I would say. It's very tough. It's not that we don't want it. We need to harmonize, and it's very important, but at the same time, this process poses significant dangers if done in a wrong manner. The NGO sector, civil society, private sector, these are all the stakeholders and all the watchdogs whose responsibility is huge in this process, huge. And I think that's how this things should develop. I think this coordination among all the stakeholders should be there. Everybody should understand this is what we need. This is the dangers that we pose. I think that's how we should work on that.
Okay, surely our last question.
Nika Rurua, Movement Iberia. Last and quick question, short one, I'll try to make it so. We hear lots of claims from government that, rule of law situation has been changed to the better. I would like to know your opinion on improvement or, deterioration of protection of property rights, contract enforcement mechanism, and so on and so on. Against those claims, we all see that economy is shrinking. Jobs are lost, and plenty of people live in Georgia. So I would like to have your take on that. Thank you.
So I will start with that, and maybe Archil will continue. Because from my point of view, I myself think that that's getting better. I think that in terms of property rights, especially intervention from the state institutions in business operations or property rights issues is less, from my point of view. And that's a good thing, definitely. On the other hand, what I see is the most important problem is policy coordination issue when we are getting absolutely different type of signals from different institutions, which does not allow us to have some predictable future, and for investors this is the most important one. And I think that's the situation that we have so far, from my point of view, for your question.
Economy is not shrinking. It's not. We had a growth of 4.8% last year with a slowdown on the fourth quarter. This year we predict 2 to 3%. It's a slowdown, but it's not shrinking. Shrinking is very painful. Inflation is in check. So overall, it's the re-evaluation of the region, while tens of billions of oil dollars have evaporated from the region, and we are in that re-evaluation, and then the only problem there is really the bank dollarization of loans, which we discussed at length. So in terms of the economy, how it's doing, yes, we see that a lot of businesses have invested in growth. Last year, private sector growth of investment was 26%. And last year's growth was majority driven by private sector investment rather than consumption. And consumption was part of it, but a small one. It was majority of it was private sector investing and growing. So that's something that is overlooked. And this year, but that doesn't mean that we should not talk and criticize some of the policies that are non-business friendly versus the EU, etc., and which we are doing through business association mainly by private sector. But it's not an apocalyptic situation for sure. It's a slowdown, but it's no shrinking. It's no crisis per se. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll take about a 5-minute break and then have a. We're going to stay here and have a wrap-up session. No break?
No break. Very brief.
Doesn't this violate the labor laws? Okay, so, Nino, who do you want up in the front here for this wrap-up?
She just asked me to make some closing remarks, Steve.
Okay.
And so this is actually an act of mercy because we are going to close in about a minute and a half and have a group photo up here. So I just wanted to make a couple of closing remarks. First, I'd like to thank all four of you for an incredibly informative and fascinating panel. If you'll please join me in thanking them. In closing, I did actually want to respond to something Mr. Chelidze said, actually in a very sympathetic way. I don't think that the kind of reticence that many observers have to heap praise on the models, development progress of Singapore and Chile have to do with the substance of what they did. I mean, we've all, not all, but I think most people who, really can unshackle themselves from ideology and just kind of look empirically at progress have seen, the fundamental logic of the market and of an incentives-based economy. So moving in the direction they did substantively was not the problem. It was the authoritarianism, not the substance. And so if you can, and there's no fundamental reason, I would say as a political scientist, why you can't enact these kinds of reforms under democracy rather than authoritarianism. And indeed, your appeal here and what has been happening in Estonia and what happened in Central and Eastern Europe, and indeed what's continued to happen in Chile and elsewhere, Korea, has shown this can happen under democracy. So that's the first point. And the second point is about human capital. And certainly, I mean, we're university professors. We're not going to at all dispute what you said about the value of education. And I tried to underscore it in a certain way yesterday, because I think it's not just about the acquisition of skills, language, technical knowledge, general knowledge. It has to be about acquisition of skills and habits of the heart of citizenship as well, and I think you would agree with that. But the personal statement I wanted to make in closing is that about a decade ago, we inaugurated a program at our Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law, which became named the Draper Hills Summer Fellows Program, to bring every year about 25 or so mid-career practitioners in democracy and development from throughout the developing and post-communist worlds. Most of us, with maybe the exception of Mike McFall, didn't know very much about Georgia. We had no particular attachment to the place, frankly. Just to be honest, I mean, broad sympathy, but otherwise no special knowledge or attachment. And something noteworthy happened over the following decade, which I only kind of recently reflected about. Every year, we just got amazing applicants and amazing participants from Georgia. And I was saying the other night, it only actually occurred to me while I was here that there is simply, we're talking about most of the world outside the West that's been the catchment area for this program. So, potentially, 80 countries or something. And obviously, we're probably not going to take participants from Vanuatu and St. Kitts and Nevis. So, maybe it's 60 or 70 countries that we're drawing from. And in fact, we've had participation from over 60 countries. But if you were to compute the ratio of, the number of participants we've had to the population size of the country, Georgia's off the charts. I can tell you it's number one. And this is no reflection on Ukraine, which has also had one of the largest absolute numbers of participants, and again, an amazing pool of people. But Georgia's a much smaller country in population than Ukraine. So, I mean, it's not just the human capital at the mass base that needs to be developed. You need leadership. And you need something, you need the spirit of democracy, if I may say so with all humility. And, we just got this sense over the last decade doing this program that there must be something special about Georgia. I don't know if it's in the clay pot you use to ferment your wine, or in the water, or in the air, or obviously in the culture or something. But, this obviously created a very strong desire for us to come here last September, and for Steve Krasner and I and our colleagues who came here from outside to come here now. I think it's why so many people from the West and the United States come here and then wind up spending a lot of time here. And I have an academic colleague who moved here and is living here. It's just a very appealing place, and I think you shouldn't underestimate the asset you have in terms of trying to get where you're trying to go by having people like yourselves playing the roles that you do. And it's really been a privilege for us to be here and interact with you and partner with you. So with that, on behalf of the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law, and our partner, the Economic Policy Research Center, and our 4 funders who I thanked yesterday, and most of all, the amazing Nino Evgenidze, who is an extraordinary source of energy and precise organization. I'd like to thank you all, close the conference, and invite you to come up for a group photo.